Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending the webinar today. I'm Chris Whitehead, the Chief Executive of FINSIA, and we're running this webinar as one of a series of webinars in association with the Asian Securities Institute Federation. I'll tell you more about that later. But before I start, before I formally introduce the session, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which each of us is participating in the webinar. Though we may be far and wide, each of us is on the land of the traditional owners. In my case, the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any First Nations people who are with us today. Well, if I can introduce the topic first, and this topic is, we're delighted to be hosting really the first of a series of webinars on behalf of the Asian Securities and Investments Federation, ASIF. ASIF is a federation of membership associations in securities and investments with the purpose of promoting the interests of the finance and investment community of Asia and Oceania, and to assist the development of finance and investment professionals through the interchange of ideas and the provision of means to facilitate industry communication across that community. The current ASIF members represent Japan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Chinese Taipei, Vietnam, and of course, via FINSIA, Australia and New Zealand. I'd welcome therefore to all attendees from all of those ASIF members. The series of webinars replaces the usual ASIF Forum events associated with its annual general meeting, given the current impossibility of travel. The theme for the series is Digital Currencies, Innovation and the Impact on Society. And we understand there's various degrees of knowledge amongst the membership of our organisations in relation to digital currencies, and therefore the first in this series of webinars is focused on the foundations, and we will build on these in the following webinars. I'll provide further details of those at the end of today's event. In our session today, the speaker is Dr. Aaron Lane, and I'd like to introduce Aaron in a moment. He will look at a short history of digital currencies, the types of digital assets, cryptocurrency exchanges and decentralized finance, cryptocurrency custody and storage, and the regulatory issues for the finance sector, including anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing compliance. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Aaron Lane. Dr. Lane is a lecturer in the Graduate School of Business and Law and a research fellow in the Blockchain Innovation Hub at RMIT University in Australia. He's the program manager of the Graduate Certificate in Emerging Technology and Law, offered by RMIT Online, and is special counsel at the law firm Buxton Hill. Dr. Lane's academic research sits at the intersection of law and economics, the economics of regulation and law and technology. He's been published in a variety of academic journals, books, and edited volumes, and he's regularly appeared as an expert witness before parliamentary inquiries at the state and federal level, and has directed a brief amicus curiae filed in the Supreme Court of the United States. He's also provided advice to Australian and foreign governments on the complex issues surrounding the regulation of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So, Dr. Lane is an Australian lawyer admitted to practice in the Supreme Court of Victoria and the High Court of Australia. We've got about 50 minutes for this session, and we've got quite a few themes to cover, but we will encourage participation through questions and answers, and you will see the Q&A button at the bottom. Please use that for questions anytime through the webinar. We'll pick those up at the end. If you have any problems, then use the chat function to access any technical assistance and those kinds of things. So Q&A, if you can please stick to that one, that would be great. If we do lose connection, that can always happen through technology, then please stick with us and we will restore the connection as quickly as possible, whichever one of it is that disappears. So with that, let's get started, and I'll hand over to you, Arvid. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of the attendees for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be continuing my long association with FINSIA. I joined the Young Finance Professionals a number of years ago and have been involved in seminars like this ever since. So great to join you. A little bit, as Chris mentioned, my own sort of professional background. I've been working since 2017 with RMIT's Blockchain Innovation Hub. RMIT has the world's first social science research centre on blockchain technology. We're a team of economists and lawyers and sociologists and historians that are looking at blockchain technology from a social science point of view. So trying to understand, what does this mean for government? What does this mean for commerce and industry and so on? And so with the RMIT BIH, I'm involved in several industry projects and academic projects there. The presentation today will also draw a little bit on the work that I'm doing with Andrew Trigard and the team at Duxton Hill. Duxton Hill is a specialist firm specialising in fraud, misconduct and financial crime. And through that practice, we've seen investment scams and others, misconduct matters involving cryptocurrency. And so I'm drawing on both the academic sort of background and the practical background as well. A brief disclaimer that I'm going to talk about financial and legal issues today, but it's not financial or legal advice or legal education. If you need that advice, then you should get it from your professionals that you'll have on hand. In terms of what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to begin with a short history of digital currencies to see what the real problem is when we're creating a digital currency. And then that leads into a discussion of blockchain technology as an infrastructure layer for the next generation of digital currencies. I'm then going to turn to looking at blockchain and provide you with a framework to understanding blockchain as that infrastructure layer using what we call the ledger-centric view of the economy. I'll then move to distinguishing between different types of digital assets, looking at cryptocurrency exchanges and markets and storage and regulation and so on. And then really briefly, I want to give you a bit of a vision for the future of finance in this space. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go into intricate technical details. This is designed as a fundamentals, a foundations seminar today to introduce you to the concepts. And so on that basis, I'm not proposing to get down in the technical weeds, but I don't think you need to do that necessarily in this space because most people don't understand the technical specifics of their mobile phones or their personal computers, and yet you understand how to use them. You understand what their economic and legal and financial significance of those things are. And I would say the same thing about digital currency and blockchain. I've given my disclaimer about not providing investment or legal advice, so I won't dwell on that. I will start by giving you a pretty bold claim, and that is that cryptocurrencies are a subset of digital currencies more broadly, but in my view, they're the one that's worth caring about the most. In the seminars that are going to follow in this series, you're going to hear of other ones, but this is a case of the best coming first, in my view. I'm also going to start by addressing some of the criticisms. Cryptocurrency's been around for a while now, and as a foundation session, I'm going to guess that there's going to be a few of you in the audience today that are actually pretty skeptical about cryptocurrency and about digital currencies more broadly. And I've been giving talks like this to groups like this for a number of years now, and these are probably the best criticisms that I hear and come up against when I'm giving seminars such as this. And I'm happy to go into question time in a bit more detail later, but On the screen now is what is typically gets thrown around about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and so on. And the first is that it's used for criminal activity. And the reason that is, in my view, is it's a bit of a hangover from the days of sort of 2013, 2014, where online dark web marketplaces such as Silk Road used Bitcoin as their kind of native currency. And we see cases coming through criminal courts where people have used Bitcoin to purchase illicit material, drugs, and so on from online marketplaces. We see ransomware attacks where the hackers are asking for payment in cryptocurrency. So there's some truth in that, but we shouldn't overstate that. The best estimates are that the illicit activity on transactions total accounts for less than 1% of transactions on cryptocurrency networks. By far, more crime is committed using Australian dollars or US dollars or other sorts of currency, fiat currency, than cryptocurrency. The second main one I hear is that cryptocurrency has no underlying value. Well, what I'm going to show you today is just that the volume of trades and the market caps of some of these cryptocurrencies. And as finance professionals, you know that if you've got a lot of demand and a lot of suppliers, that's the value right there. And of course, there are projects that don't have a lot of value in this space, but that's part of the job, I think, of finance professionals to weed out, what are the ones that do have value and what don't. Cryptocurrency can be highly volatile in terms of its price, but what we've seen and what I'm going to discuss later today is actually cryptocurrency solutions for that problem. Regulation has been criticised as being either non-existent or too lax. And that may or may not be true depending on your perspective on those matters. But what I would say is that the regulatory pacing problem with cryptocurrencies is the same for other emerging technologies. And that is that there's always a lag effect. When a new technology sort of enters the world, there's always a lag effect with regulatory frameworks catching up to new technology, and cryptocurrency is really no different. Another criticism is it's difficult to get professional advice, and absolutely that is the case. But that's not a problem with cryptocurrency. That's a problem with professionals like yourself needing to get out there and start to offer those products. And I think the more that we can get advice in the space, the better the ecosystem will become. And then the last point is around the consumer usage experience. It can be complicated for people. It can be cumbersome. It can be technologically demanding for some people. And I think there's a trade-off in this space where the more control you want to have over your assets, the more difficult it can become. And so I think, yes, it can be difficult, but the user experience is improving. And I'll talk about that as well. So what I'd like you to do is if you're someone that's come to this presentation with one or many of those regular criticisms, I think you're starting from a genuine place. And what I'd encourage you to do is to broaden your thinking and see what the opportunities are in this ecosystem. I'll move now to providing what I think is a very short but necessary history of digital currencies. And really the background here is it starts the story begins really in the mid-1980s, where we had two groups of people. We have cypherpunks who are interested in maintaining privacy and wanting to maintain privacy of communication networks and those sorts of things. And we've got these crypto anarchists that have got more of a bent, sort of an anti-government bent. Both of these movements are occurring in the United States in the 1980s and are interested in using cryptographic technology for payments and for seeing a world where governments aren't involved in economic transactions. So that's one side of that, these ideological and technological roots that we find. Another mindset, though, is just a more practical one. Throughout the late 80s, the early 90s, we're seeing the adoption of the personal computer and the internet. And with email, people start to think, well, if I can send an email instantaneously, then why can't I send a payment instantaneously? Remember, in 1995, when the Age is talking about the check being in the email, the check was the most innovative financial sort of payments thing that we'd come up with in centuries, and so people are looking forward to that new innovation rather than having to go into the bank, provide their currency over to the teller with their deposit slip and so on. So there was a practical element to this as well, and a bit more of a mainstream consumer interest. There were numerous attempts to start a native digital currency. And what I mean by that is not a digital version of, say, the Australian dollar or the US dollar or the euro or the Japanese yen or something like that. It's a native digital currency. And the problem with any payment system is you need to solve what's called the double spending problem. And that is, if I want to pay Chris $100, the payment system needs to work in such a way that when I make that transfer of $100 to Chris, it credits Chris's account with $100, but it deducts $100 from my account. If the payment system can't do that, then it doesn't really work as a payment system. We no longer have that scarcity of money. And in the digital environment, it's trivially easy to copy anything. When we send, let's say, an image file by email, what we're doing there is we're not sending the original image. We're sending somebody a copy of that image. And so it's trivially easy to copy information. That was really the problem with music streaming in the early 2000s with Napster and so on. And so that's the problem that we need to solve with digital currencies. And so how do we solve that? Well, the first attempts were using a company that would verify the transactions in some way. And that's akin to what a bank does in the traditional payment sector, where it holds accounts, it oversees the transfer, it audits, and deducts from people's accounts and so on. And then we have interbank transfers and what have you. And so we see an analogous thing popping up in the digital space. And the first of those in earnest was Digicash, and that founded in 1990, but was bankrupt by 1998. PayPal originally was set up as a native currency for Palm Pilots, if you remember those. Now, they had a better idea, which was to be a payments gateway for the internet. Now, that business model change was, as it turns out, a really good move for them, but it meant that digital currency project fell by the wayside. eGold and Liberty Reserve were two projects that had pretty similar aims, and that was to have a currency that was backed by something else. In eGold's case, as the name suggests, it was backed by gold. In Liberty Reserve's case, you deposited your US dollars or your euros or gold, and you got in return a Liberty dollar or a Liberty euro, and then you could use that Liberty dollar for transactions. Both of those projects got shut down by litigation in the US, and that was due to money laundering concerns, proceeds of crime concerns, and those sorts of things. So we start with that double spending problem, needing to solve that. The way that it was solved in all of these cases was using a centralized firm, a company, to manage that process. What you find, though, is that those companies can go bankrupt. Those companies can change their business model. Those companies can get shut down by the government. And so the necessary thing here for a digital currency is it not only needs to solve that double spending problem, it needs to do that in a way that's not going to be shut down by one of these causes. And so fast forward to 2008, and we see the release of a white paper, and it proposes a peer-to-peer electronic cash system known as Bitcoin. And it proposes to solve this double spending problem, not based on trust, not based on a centralized company, but based on a distributed network of computers and using cryptographic proof, that is maths, rather than using trust. And the author of this white paper was somebody by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Some people think it's one person. I tend to think it's probably 3 or 4 people working together, some of whom, given that the cryptographers in the 1980s, they're in their heyday in the 80s, it's likely that some of that group might not be still around today. Whoever it is holds about 1 million Bitcoin, which in today's dollars is $58 billion. So they're sitting on a nice pile of gold there. The way that Bitcoin solved that double spending problem was to have a network of computers. They would listen out for transactions. The transactions would be grouped in a block, and then that block of transactions would be chained to all the previous transactions, and hence the name blockchain. And this ran on a proof of work sort of system, which requires a large amount of computing power. So all the computers on the network are competing with each other to solve pretty complex mathematical problems, and the winner gets the right to put that new entry onto the database. And so with that short history, I'm now going to talk about, well, what is this blockchain? And so the idea is that we move from this central server to a distributed network. And so basically, we've got a shared ledger, a shared database, and we move from this centralized server to a distributed, a decentralized ledger. Now, in order to do that, we need some sort of consensus mechanism so that we know how to update that record over time. That's where cryptocurrency comes in part, is in that economic incentive to maintain that network. I want to now introduce you, though, to the ledger-centric view of the economy, and that is that over time, when something important has happened throughout human history, we have recorded that information, and we've done that for millennia. This is one of my favourite paintings, St. John the Evangelist. It's hanging in the Museum of Sacred Art in Italy, and it speaks to me because recording something important in the life of the people that surrounded this person, and is recording it not just for himself and those around him, but to pass down through history. And humans have been recording information in some way for as long as we've existed. What's interesting, though, is the technology of how we do that has changed. But fundamentally, that information makes up economies. Recording debts, recording accounts, recording transactions, recording different organizations. That really is at the heart of what an economy is. It's at the heart of what law is too. In the law, whether it's the parliament or the legislature creating the law and recording it in that way, or whether it's cases coming before the courts in the common law tradition, where a case is recorded and reported on so that new cases can refer back to those previous cases, and the law is recorded in that way as well. And so when our method or our technology of those ledgers change, it changes the economy around us. It's incredibly difficult to record information on a stone tablet. It's very time consuming, it's labor intensive, creates a lot of strength. It requires a lot of strength. Clay tablets, it's more malleable, it's easier, therefore more information is recorded. When we have papyrus, the prototype of paper, we can then transport that record, to the next village, to the next city. When we have double entry bookkeeping in the Middle Ages, that creates the scope then for more permanent forms of organisations. We start to see municipalities, we start to see the joint stock trading companies and so on. The digitisation of spreadsheets in 80s, 90s and beyond has seen the rise of global financial capitalism. And so every time we've had a change in the technology of ledgers, the change in the way we record information and share that information and have access to that information, the economy changes. And so we can make similar predictions in relation to blockchain and distributed ledger technology, and I'm going to come back to that at the end. The Bitcoin blockchain solved that double spending problem by combining 5 different technologies. It combined cryptography, this idea of a ledger, a distributed peer-to-peer computer network, incentive design, and computer algorithms. And as I mentioned previously, it uses a proof of work blockchain, that is computing power and competing computers. There are other types of consensus mechanisms. So 2 of the main other types are proof of stake. An example of this is in the Cosmos ecosystem. And this is a holding-based consensus mechanism. That is, transactions are verified not by computers competing against each other, but by validators that hold a particular stake, and the higher the stake, the more that they might be selected to validate that transaction, or it could be based on how long that validator has held those tokens for. In some ecosystems, users can delegate their holdings. So if I have Osmo, for instance, which is the token for the osmosis, I can stake that with a validator and I can earn rewards for staking that. And I'm, in a way, indirectly participating in the validation and the governance of that network. And so that doesn't require as much computing power, but solves that security problem in a different way. Proof of authority is another example. This is where we have a semi-permissioned blockchain. So the others that I've spoken about, Bitcoin is open source. Anyone can download the code and start running a node. In proof of authority, you've got to be vetted by the foundation that runs the blockchain first, and as a respected sort of approved participant, and you're trusting that those validators then are updating the record faithfully. And so I think what we get from that is that there's no single type of cryptocurrency, that we've got different consensus mechanisms, we've got different reward structures, we've got different applications that are built on the top of these currencies. We'll move now to looking to the types of cryptocurrencies, and I encourage you to go to a website called CoinMarketCap. There are others out there as well, but I just think this is a good one. And you'll see there that there are literally thousands of cryptocurrencies. On the screen, I've provided you with the top 20. And even here, we can see a variety of different types of cryptocurrencies. Some of these stem from Bitcoin. Ethereum will be the well-known other that functions in a different way. You see stable coins in the mix, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. You see native coins for particular ecosystems, for decentralized exchanges. There's a large variety of different cryptocurrencies that all kind of do different things and are designed for different purposes. What you see there, though, have a look at the market cap, over $1 trillion for Bitcoin. 461 billion for Ethereum. Just shy of 100 billion for Tether and so on. So we're talking about a significant amount of capital that's locked up in these ecosystems now. And so when people sort of say to me, oh, it's a fad, or it's a bubble, it's going to pop, I think, well, this is, in the case of Bitcoin, this is a network continually running since 2009. So it hasn't gone anywhere just yet. On that list, we can distinguish between stable coins, that is those coins that offer a relatively stable value, and that can be pegged to a fiat currency. The most popular ones are the US dollar, or it could be pegged to some other asset. And there's variations into how those stable coins achieve that goal. Sometimes that's achieved through a price oracle. Sometimes it might be achieved by holding the physical currency. It might be achieved by a basket of currencies. There are various ways to achieve that. A security token is something that is highly regulated, actually, by many jurisdictions, and the token that you receive represents ownership of a physical or a digital asset. Some ecosystems have governance tokens in addition to their other cryptocurrency. So the cryptocurrency might be used for payments, whereas the governance token is used for voting rights, for governance decisions to govern the network. A utility token provides the right to use a particular product or service. It might, again, ecosystems might have two tokens. One is used for payments. The other might be used as to pay the payments fee, for example. The craze at the moment in crypto land is non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. This provides you with ownership over a unique collectible product. So it might be an artwork. It could be a music file. It could be to signify that you've attended a particular event. These are really incredibly popular at the moment, and have got some sort of serious real world players in the space as well. In terms of other types of asset classes, we've got what I call sort of the traditional financial products, in the sense that we can have investment funds that are simply allowing institutional investors or high net worth individuals to deposit their money and gain exposure to cryptocurrency without having to actually physically own it. We then have probably a more retail offering in exchange traded funds. So you don't need to go to an investment fund. You can simply trade an ETF on a market. There are various markets around the world that have crypto ETFs, where the fund either purchases crypto or they hold futures contracts in crypto. And those interests can be traded on the open market. We then have a number of futures markets for Bitcoin, and contracts for difference. Now, there are differences between futures and CFDs that, as finance professionals, you probably have a greater understanding than I. But nevertheless, they operate in a similar way and allow speculation, whether you want to long or short. You can also leverage your position so that your returns are, can be greater than actually what your contract worth is for. That obviously comes with the downside risk as well. So we're seeing crypto products being launched in pretty traditional financial markets around the world. As an adjunct to that, really a separate ecosystem is emerging called DeFi, or decentralized finance. And just like we've got kind of large investment funds, we're seeing large decentralized autonomous organizations spring up to offer similar services, but yet provide token holders with governance rights over those organizations. recently, the state of Wyoming in the United States has provided legal recognition to DAOs if they want to structure as an LLC in Wyoming. They can. There are projects that are run out of Delaware that use a similar sort of structure as an LLC. And so that's gaining, I guess, sort of popular recognition by governments. It's possible to loan and to lend out and to borrow cryptocurrency based on a cryptocurrency collateral. So you lock up crypto in a vault. You can borrow against that with perhaps a different type of cryptocurrency. And liquidity pools are another popular place in DeFi land where you can essentially deposit your tokens, lock up your tokens in a smart contract, and those tokens get added to a pool which are used to perform token swaps if you want to trade between different types of cryptocurrencies on a decentralized exchange. So there's a lot of activity happening in this space and a lot of scope there for using the knowledge that traders have in the financial space and being able to leverage that into cryptocurrency and to DeFi. I want to talk now just to introduce you to exchanges, to custody and to storage. And most retail consumers are going to purchase cryptocurrency from a cryptocurrency exchange. Exchanges themselves and larger institutional investors might have the purchasing power to purchase from a wholesale liquidity provider. That could be a cryptocurrency miner themselves, or it could be a middleman that provides that service. Now, in Australia and around the world, these digital currency exchanges are increasingly being regulated. In the Australian jurisdiction, digital currency exchanges are required to register with AUSTRAC and comply with anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing laws, including know your customer obligations and those sorts of things when onboarding customers. And then they have reporting obligations and additional due diligence requirements depending on the transactions that occur on those networks. So that's how most people are going to get to this space. The next portion that I want to discuss is about storage and about how you store your cryptocurrency. That's really important because there's no bank account here. You get you have a very different experience. So one option is you can go with the wallet that's on the exchange that you bought your cryptocurrency from. Now, there's some issues with this. One is that the exchange has control of those private keys usually. So if the exchange is hacked, then somebody can get control of those private keys and send your cryptocurrency somewhere else. It's like robbing a bank, but once the money's gone, it's gone. The other issue is that public addresses aren't always constant. Sometimes the exchanges cycle through sort of different addresses, and you'll obviously access that on the internet or some other sort of web-based application on your smartphone. And so, hacking and passwords and those sorts of things are issues for that. A more secure version is a software wallet. This is where you've got an application that's installed on your device. It's connected to the internet, but it's on your personal device. Nobody else has those private keys. Only you can control that personally. Now, the risk of that is that people lose their computers or lose their passwords or lose their things and no longer have access. And you do hear news reports where people are rifling through garbage dumps and those sorts of things because they accidentally have a Bitcoin on a computer somewhere. A hardware wallet is, I guess, the next step along the curve, where your private keys are stored in an encrypted hardware device. Some look like a USB sort of flash drive. Others look like a bit more of a Boolean sort of thing. But the key thing there is that they're not going to be connected to the internet on an ongoing basis, and so are more secure in that respect. What we've seen in this space is that particularly larger investors, institutional investors, want a bit more service around that. They might lack the technological capability to do it themselves, and so there are now businesses providing storage solutions with other products such as insurance and so on. And just finally, before we go into questions, people often ask, well, we've got automation and we've got now digital payments and we've got programmable money. Well, what does this mean for finance? What does it mean for accounting? What does it mean for management and so on? And one view of the world is that, well, we're all just replaced by computers and robots. I think that's a bit more of a pessimistic sort of view of the world. Our view of the world, at least at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub, is that we're not just innovating on production, but we're actually innovating on governance. And a blockchain is something that sits in between different entities. And so while some parts of a finance contract or financial arrangements may be automated, others will require absolutely human input. And the human input will be about the decisions governing those frameworks as well. And so there's absolutely an ongoing role for finance professionals, accounting professionals, lawyers, thank God, going forward in all of this. What it does provide is that displacement to create opportunity, that Schumpeterian idea of creation, creative destruction and innovation, that there's a whole lot of opportunity in this space. It's really exciting to be a part of. And I'm looking forward now to taking your questions. Again, you can look me up on both RMIT or Duxton Hill, but and just finally, Chris, before we head to questions, I just want to plug RMIT's new DeFi course, launched with Future Learn. I think it's been launched this week, so fresh off the press.
Excellent, and thank you very much indeed, Aaron. Your great presentation, and yeah, I think it's achieved our objective. If you like, establishing those foundations, bringing everyone up to the key concepts, lots of questions flooded in. I'm going to try and kind of bunch these together so we can get through as many as possible. And there's a lot of questions really about sort of government response. Is it only of value because it can be converted to a fiat currency? The regulation side and so on. So perhaps in a general sense, you go like, what are the legitimate concerns of government? Perhaps what's the impact on the real economy? And then perhaps talk a little more specifically about the announcement this week from the People's Bank of China with regards to cryptocurrency transactions being banned. You're muted.
Yeah, excellent. Chris, have you got me now?
I have, yes.
Yeah, great. Sorry. Yes, sorry. I just had to change my.
Sorry for that.
No, it's quite all right. I just had to change my headphones. I ran out of battery, I think. So look, it's a great question. I think governments around the world are worried about a number of different things. The first is around fraud and around scams and wanting to avoid that sort of thing, but also wanting to avoid other criminal activity, drug trafficking, arms dealing, those sorts of nefarious activities as well. And I think those are legitimate concerns of government, absolutely. Having said that, I have to say that there are some jurisdictions, and I won't name them, but there are some jurisdictions that actually want to encourage that activity. around the world. And so we're seeing actually a concentration of some of that nefarious activity in particular sort of places. So I think it does cut both ways, but there's a genuine sort of thing about wanting to regulate in that respect. And I think the appropriate point is probably at that exchange level, where people are kind of onboarding onto the system. Having said that, though, what cryptocurrency provides law enforcement and other sort of private sort of bodies as well is the ability to publicly audit the transaction history. If you're dealing with an open source blockchain, you can go on to the blockchain explorers and see the transactions and follow them through. And so you can't do that with cash. Or if you do it with cash, it can be incredibly expensive. So law enforcement around the world are using these tools now to trace. The second, I think, concern for governments is around sort of tax and wanting people to comply with their tax obligations and running businesses onshore. A few years ago, I was talking to a government official in Asia who was talking to me about wanting to encourage a blockchain industry in this particular country. And I said, as respectfully as I could to this minister, look, you actually have a blockchain industry. It just so happens that they've incorporated in Singapore. They're operating from here. They just think that the corporate regulation and the tax regulation in Singapore is much nicer. And so I think governments have to be careful not to overreact in this space. And I think that's what we are seeing with China's ban on cryptocurrency payments is we're seeing two things there. It's about competition with other digital currency projects that are state kind of based, competition with traditional payments, but also, that sort of issue of what's happening here. So, yeah, a few different, genuine things that governments are worried about.
And the recent announcement by the People's Bank of China. How do you feel about that?
Look, I tend to see this through the lens of a competition sort of lens, where central banks around the world are proposing their own sort of form of digital currency. I've got to say, if you dial the clock back just even a few years, a lot of these central banks were saying that that wasn't the future and that there was no sort of case for it and there was no case for cryptocurrency and all of these sorts of things. Well, now they're all sort of doing these projects. And I think that the messaging on that from central banks around the world has certainly shifted quite substantially in a very short period of time.
Yeah, now I'm not going to understand perhaps concerned about losing some of the levers and controls that they currently do have access to. There's a lot of questions around definition. Is it a currency? Is it a crypto product? What defines a currency? Is it the best currency? Because if you like, it's purely for as a medium of exchange. Without getting too academic around definitions of currencies, how do you think it kind of fits in that definition, or what is a currency? Why is crypto so powerful as a currency?
Well, look, I mean, the answer to most of these questions is it depends, and it simply depends on the project, and this is one of the one of the difficulties in this space is trying to people try and box in something into an existing kind of category, and so I guess what I've tried to present today is a bit of a taxonomy of, well, you've got projects that are designed for payments. That's what they're facilitating as a digital currency, and it's a payment. You've got other ones that are more about almost being a version of digital gold. You've got others that are more along the lines of, a stable sort of coin. So I think that's a sort of a helpful way to look at it is to not to try and box it into the existing sort of stuff that we think about, foreign currency and so on. Although I must say, there's at least a couple of jurisdictions, El Salvador being the latest, that have adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender. So they're saying not only is it permitted, we're actually going to recognize this as an official currency of the land. You can pay your taxes in it, and we're going to encourage the use. So I find that sort of fascinating as well.
Right. We've talked a lot about the underlying, what it is and the purpose. There's a couple of questions which I think are really interesting. A good example from Arjun Chadha, which is about what drives the valuation of Bitcoin. So valuations, and perhaps again more broadly, you said it would be good to see more investment advice available. So there are a lot of concerns around the impact on investors. Should I invest? As this becomes more retail and more available. Perhaps that kind of what does drive the valuation? How can an investor kind of think about that?
Well, I mean, the big thing for me is just the number of people that are in the ecosystem is naturally going to drive, demand for, any major cryptocurrency. You tend to see. I'm a lawyer, so it's I don't want to get too much out of my depth, but you've got a lot of the prices tend to move together. At least in the major, sort of cryptocurrency bucket. And so I think a lot of that is just adoption. That's what's driving the valuation at the moment is more and more and more users are coming into the market. And that's really the underlying price. Now, others will get involved in speculating, is it going to go up tomorrow or down tomorrow? And you can pick the cyclical patterns. And if that's something you're good at doing, good luck to you. It's not my particular skill set. But, if you want to do that technical analysis or, a regression analysis or whatever you like to do, you can do it. The long-term valuation, though, over time is simply at the moment adoption. And it's becoming more mainstream. We're seeing pretty respected, established businesses absolutely in the blockchain space, putting millions of dollars of investment. I think when you're seeing that, that's what's driving this.
Great. All right. Thank you. Another couple of questions. There's a question here with regards to crypto loans and how do crypto loans work and flash loans. So what about lending in the crypto space and how does that compete with traditional lending?
Yeah, we're starting to get in the technical weeds, when we start talking about flash loans. But look, in general terms, the loans in this space are being able to lock up a crypto asset of some kind and borrow against that, often with another form, of cryptocurrency. And so I think what's being what will be interesting to see I mentioned the non-fungible tokens. A non-fungible token effectively is something that you can't just convert to another type of cryptocurrency. So it's a crypto asset that you can't just readily exchange. If you've got Ethereum, it's pretty easy to swap Ethereum to Bitcoin. If you've got an NFT artwork, you can't just convert that, right? So instead, what you want to be able to do is lock that up in a vault and borrow against it, so you can unlock your equity, but use those funds to do something else. And then, so long as you pay back your loan, you can unlock your asset and then sell that underlying asset. And if you default on it, well, a smart contract could mean that it automatically, in the case of default, it automatically executes and transfers the ownership to somebody else. So there's some great possibilities, I think, for just adding additional risk and adding value. So anything to do with these, sort of loans is adding risk, but that's the whole idea, right? That any loan, that's what the interest rate is pricing that risk.
Great. Okay. Perhaps sticking on that investment perspective, it's a question kind of dear to my own heart. When I see some new technology or some new feature or whatever, I always want to get out and play with it. It must be the geek in me. Question here from Mark Alexander saying, in essence, you wanted to educate yourself and Anthony Carter should say, and kind of dip your toes in cryptocurrency as a user, not the biggest investor in the world, but just kind of that curiosity and learning. What would be a good way for people here to start to gain experience?
Well, great question. In this space, you'll learn by doing, and I couldn't recommend participating in some small way enough. The reality is transaction fees can be relatively high, and so it's not the sort of thing that you'll put in sort of $20. You probably need to put in a few $100s, right? And so only spend what you're willing to never see again. Having said that, though, my advice to getting involved in the system would be, if you're starting from scratch, open an exchange account with an Australian-based exchange of some kind. There are many. And then download a software wallet. So not just the exchange wallet, but you can download a popular, it could be one in like MetaMask or, that's in your browser, or it can be a standalone application like Exodus. There are many others, and transfer the cryptocurrency from your exchange to your wallet, to your software wallet. And then depending on what cryptocurrency you purchase, if you purchase, say, Ethereum, you might want to go to an NFT market and buy a digital artwork or something like that. If you're interested in DeFi, you might want to go to, say, the Osmosis ecosystem and connect your wallet. I think they use a Kepler wallet. You connect your wallet and you can play around. You can swap cryptocurrencies. You can add your cryptocurrency to a liquidity pool. It's relatively straightforward, but you'll learn a lot by doing in this space.
Great. All right. That sounds good, because that's the way I like to learn things. So certainly good for me. Having said that, some the debanking of some exchanges, Bitcoin, Wave, and so on. Do you think that's going to be just a phase, and we'll work through that, with legislative changes and so on?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, and for those that aren't familiar with the issue, there was a story that ran on ABC The Business last week that Bitcoin Babe was there. I appeared in that clip as well. And the comments I had around that is absolutely, debanking has been a problem for the local cryptocurrency industry. That is that banks are seeing them as too high a risk in terms of anti-money laundering and those sorts of things, and therefore aren't giving them banking services. Now, it has been difficult for some operators, but they are also being banked by major players as well. Mm-hmm. And I tend to think that part of the problem is a competition problem. And I think as we're starting to see the rise of neobanks and other sort of financial institutions, that's probably the solution, is that you can have the emergence of financial entities that perhaps have a bit more of a risk appetite, because they see the opportunity in that. So that's my personal view, is that's where the solution is, rather than having regulatory sort of moves. Yeah. But the other thing I would say is that the Australian Senate inquiry, I know this is Australian focused, but the Australian Senate inquiry is looking at a more comprehensive framework for cryptocurrency businesses. And I think when we see that, it will lessen that regulatory risk, because some of what's going on with the Australian financial institutions and debanking is not because they don't want to, that they see a non-compliance with Australian law. It's their liquidity providers that are located elsewhere, whether it's Singapore, whether it's, you know, the UK or the US or wherever it might be. The liquidity providers to the Australian banks have obligations under their own regulatory frameworks. And so that's an issue as well. So I think when we're starting to see more comprehensive regulatory frameworks, it will give the sector a bit more confidence. And we're also starting to see insurance companies, you know, start to offer crypto, you know, insurance coverage and those sorts of things. So it's not to say it's not a problem, but it's certainly getting better.
So and getting a lot easier. Certainly, I'm very conscious of that direct access from you know, some banks, and you know, a good example here in Australia, Revolut providing direct access from your account into exchanges and so on. We pride ourselves here in FINSIA on sticking to schedule, which is always a huge problem with a topic like this. You can see, you know, another 32 questions have come in, and you know, we'll be here all night trying to answer them if we did do so. So I will have to call it a day there in order to let people get on with other commitments. But Alan, I'd really like to thank you. You can see the interest this has generated by the flood of questions and great comments and great feedback. And as I say, very much achieved the objective we set out, which was to give people that foundation as we now move along and look at some of the other implementations which are tending to be in the sort of central bank digital currencies. And I noted your comments at the start with regards to you know, having a broader view than simply that. And you know, I know we'll be running a lot more webinars, you know, even after this series. So thank you enormously for that. And what we will do is send out to everyone that has attended a feedback form. So we're very keen to get your feedback. That'll be sent to you in the chat window right now. So if you have a look in chat, hopefully any second now you'll have pop up the feedback form. If not, we will get that sent out to you. The upcoming webinar. So if we can bring up the slides, Surveyor, on the next webinars in the series. Are you still with us? No, we're having a challenge there with bringing up that presentation, but we will get that information to you. Watch the website of FINSIA, your local Securities Institute. The next webinar is probably on October the 20th. That's from the Security Analysts Association of Japan, and that will cover the Cambodian cryptocurrency launched in 2020. So with that, again, thank you very much indeed for attending, everyone from ASIF members and other guests. Thank you, Aaron, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris. See you.